Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the launch of our new piece of research on greening construction, a complex challenge for job skills and training, which is a unique collaboration between SKOPE and the Environmental Change Institute at the University of Oxford and Edge Foundation. I'm Kat Thames and I'm Senior Research and Policy Officer here at Edge Foundation, and you're all very welcome. Thank you for joining us today. I'd just like to invite our research team to come onto screen at this point, and I'll introduce who has been involved in this research. So Professor Susan James Relly from the University of Oxford, James Robson, Gavin Killip, Mike Klassen, all from the University of Oxford, and my colleague Andrea Laxic as well from Edge Foundation. So yeah, you're all very welcome, and really looking forward to sharing our research findings with you today. I'll be handing over to Susan in a moment, who's going to present some of our key findings from the research. Just before that though, yeah, someone's just asked in the chat whether this is going to be recorded. It is being recorded, and we will share this recording afterwards with all those that have attended as well. So please do feel free to engage with the chat today. We've also got a Q&A function as well, and we'll be having a Q&A session with our research team and respondents later in the hour. So please do keep posting your questions in there, and we will come to as many as we can later on. Do also feel free to tweet during the session. We're using the hashtag greening construction, and do tag Edge and SKOPE and ECI Oxford in those as well. So today we have an excellent lineup to discuss this hugely important topic. As we aim to move towards a net zero future, we must ensure that our current and future workforce has the knowledge, skills and dispositions needed for a sustainable future. And in this piece of research, we focused on what that means for the construction industry. So to begin our session, we'll be hearing some of the key findings from Susan James Relly, who is Professor in Vocational Education and Director of SKOPE at the Centre for Skills, Knowledge and Organisational Performance at the University of Oxford. Following Susan's presentation, we'll also be hearing from 4 expert respondents. We have Craig Thorley from the Department for Education, Professor Chris Winch from King's College London, Brian Berry from Federation of Master Builders, and Teresa Frith from the Association of Colleges. And then, as I say, we'll be having a Q&A session after that. So thank you all for coming today, and I hope you find the session enjoyable and interesting, and I'll hand over to Susan now.
Thanks very much, Kat. I am going to share my screen with you. Great. Excellent. It's a huge pleasure to be able to present the findings of this research project to you today. It's been a great team to work with, the collaboration between the Edge Foundation, SKOPE and ECI at Oxford, and just a really fantastic team, because we're all very passionate about this topic and trying to understand better what greening construction would mean, and how we can do it for job skills and training in the construction sector. I rarely meet anyone these days who is not concerned with climate change, or who doesn't ask what they can be doing, what their bit can be to mitigate against it. And with a young child, you know, it's foremost in my mind, thinking about the world that we're leaving behind. So at the recent COP26, governments worldwide committed to climate emission reduction targets. UK policy attention has turned to the concept of a Green New Deal, and at the heart of this deal lies localised job creation through investment in sustainable, low-energy buildings and high-quality homes, renewable and affordable energy, and low-carbon transport infrastructure. And indeed, the International Energy Agency has highlighted 2 key objectives which are hugely relevant for buildings in the construction industry. And these are the electrification of energy services in buildings, especially heating, and a relentless focus on energy efficiency. Now, these are big targets and objectives, and for them to be met, and to be delivered, the construction industry has to be on board. But there's so much rhetoric around green skills, green jobs, and a lot of it is focused on the construction sector. And so we wanted to understand better what's actually happening and what are the key mechanisms in place to help ensure that the construction industry is on board. And that was the basis of this research. So our aims were to understand how green jobs and green skills are conceptualized within the sector, in the buildings and education research community, and in the buildings, energy and education policy communities. And we also wanted to develop understanding of future green skills needs in education and training in order to provide meaningful recommendations on how the construction skills formation system can best meet the skills demands of a greener economy. This seemed easier when we started the project than how it actually turned out to be. So our methodology to try and achieve our aims was we did a literature review, we covered journal articles, conference proceedings, books, book chapters, published between 2000 and 2021, plus snowballing publications until we reached saturation. What we found is that the empirical and theoretical literature formed two distinct groups. First, there were more global studies that engage with definitional and conceptual debates around green jobs, green skills, and the green economy. And then we identified a second group of more localized studies focused on green skills within construction and building sector in England. But within these, there were very distinct silos in cognate areas. We also conducted document analysis of the current training provision in the construction sector, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment, to try and understand better, what's being provided and how, the skills interest and pedagogic interest can intersect and can be understood better. And then we conducted a stakeholder workshop with 40 stakeholders, of which some of the participants here today were participants. And these consisted of education and skills policymakers, energy policymakers, industry agencies, representative trade bodies, employers, educationalists, awarding bodies, FE colleges, and energy, construction and education researchers to get as broad a view as possible. So what were our key findings? Well, it's going to be quite difficult for me in the next 10 minutes to condense what the findings were. The report ended up being, I think, over 40 pages long. Our key findings are around 6 main areas: around the VET system for the construction sector, different conceptualizations of green jobs, skills, occupations in the green economy, the knowledge, skills and competence required in construction, issues around higher education and further education, and a need for a joined up education and training approach and engagement with local needs, supply, demand and use of skills, and then leading on to jobs, careers and training pathways. I'm not going to be able to touch on all of them, and the report was launched this morning, so I hope over the next month or so you'll be able to read with it and potentially engage with us further. But just to give you a few highlights as we move forward. For those of you familiar with the education and training system, you won't be surprised to hear that the VET system for the construction sector is complex and fragmented, offering apprenticeships, BTECs and standalone NVQs, new T-level courses, as well as short CPD courses. FE colleges and private training providers are not the only providers in the sector. Many manufacturers often training on individual pieces of technology or equipment themselves. We were able to find that in 2020, there were 550 building and construction qualifications with college enrollments at a variety of levels 1, 2, and 3. That's a lot of different qualifications. Over 300 providers of construction-related training. Between 2015 and 19, approximately 110,000 students per year enrolled in courses in the category of construction planning in the built environment. We believe there are approximately 12,000 apprenticeship and training starts per year between 2018 and 2020, although that did fall with the pandemic. And that between 2015 and 19, there are on average, approximately 45,000 construction apprentices at any given time. That's a lot of people training for future skills needs. So if we then think about, that future training for those potential jobs. What became clear through the research is that there are very different conceptualizations depending on whether you're looking at the education literature, the policy literature, actually within the industry. And I think this quote from one of our participants really sums it up. How do you define green jobs? I think we need to move away from defining it by levels of skills, and the ILO definition has it as decent jobs. And I think that's a huge issue. The quality of the jobs is something we need to look at, decent, high quality and inclusive jobs. And that needs to be part of the definition. And it's not entirely clear that that is part of the definition at the moment. So it's something that we need to move towards. Another key area is knowledge, skill and competence. And one of the things that was really clear, not only in the literature, but from our workshop, is that when we talk about knowledge, skill and competence in the construction sector, we can't focus just on technical skills. Okay, of course, they're a big part of it, those linked to emerging technologies, sustainable practices and building regulations. But we need to also be thinking about employability skills required for engaging in complex, fragmented contexts, that particularly where it's a sector and an industry dominated by subcontracting. So you might have two people, both carpenters working on the same site. One comes from a green employer or what's deemed a green employer, and another one from an SME, him and someone else or her and someone else working and just trying to get on and do the job. So you can see how the complexity begins to come about when you're trying to even think about what kind of jobs are green. There was clearly a need for knowledge and understanding of broad issues related to climate change. So a need for young people to understand the kinds of work that they were doing and the future impact it would have in order to achieve our overarching goals of sustainable practice. And we've termed this a sustainability-oriented mindset. But then also there needs to be flexibility and adaptability to deal with future uncertainties and a likely period of change in practice that will require CPD beyond the initial point of training. We in many respects, don't know the jobs we're going to need. 20 years ago, did we know we would need certain occupations that are required now? So there needs to be flexibility and adaptability as we move forward. One of the key things that came out was that perhaps we need to stop thinking about HE and FE in silos. Sorry for the typo there, I've just noticed. And think more about a tertiary landscape. And I think this quote really helps sums up those findings, that this could be resolved much more effectively if we stopped worrying about if this is HE or FE and be working much more closely together to resolve the issue. If we keep on insisting everybody's a failure unless they go to university, we're never going to get the people with level 3, 4 and 5 skills that we actually need to fit the heat pumps and to deal with the retrofit stuff as well. So it's about working together across a tertiary landscape. And this, I haven't covered all of the 6 areas of findings due to time, but this all led to our conclusions, which are around a coordinated approach to green skills and green jobs in construction, that we need a broader conceptualization of the skills required for a greener future. We need to be thinking about technical skills combined with employability skills and sustainability-oriented dispositions and CPD-oriented dispositions. That there needs to be an emphasis on CPD, that this isn't just about initial education and training. That training structures and incentives for SMEs, micro businesses and self-employed contractors needs to be front and center. They're a huge part of the construction sector. There are many, many SMEs and micro businesses operating who simply can't afford to, if they've got an apprentice and an employee, to send them off. So it's about thinking about the training structures and incentives that would be available for those businesses. That we need CPD for those involved in delivering training. This is a very fast-paced sector. Things are moving in our need to deliver our net zero targets. And so how are we helping those who are delivering the training to stay up to date? Clearly, we need much stronger strategic partnership arrangements in terms of delivering the education and training that's required to develop the skills levels that we need. And greater regulation came out as being a big lever in terms of doing this. as we all know, it is quite an unregulated sector. There are certain elements that are highly regulated and others that aren't. And so greater regulation will help in that respect. One of the other features that came out that is an element of all of these is young people as agents of change. We discussed this at, in some detail in some of the groups in the participant workshop, and it was clear that if we're going to reach those targets that have been set at COP26 and through new deals and all the rest of it, it's young people doing those jobs in 5, 10, 15 years' time. It's our current young people that we need to be getting into that sustainability-oriented mindset, to be thinking about how they can be doing this. And I think the reality is that they're probably far more ahead of most of us, definitely of myself, in thinking about the world and how we can make it a better place. So I think focusing education and training in a way that's going to speak to young people around green skills and green jobs is going to be hugely important. You know, I've given you all a whistle-stop tour of our findings and the conclusions. It's all much more detailed in the report. I'm going to stop sharing now and come back to the main screen. As I said, you know, whistle-stop tour, these were our main findings and conclusions. We hope to be able to continue this work. We've got some journal articles in Train that's looking at more the theoretical elements of the literature to bring it in. There are always going to be areas that we won't have been able to cover in the report, or that some of our readers might feel we've glossed over and haven't given due attention to. And that's where, you know, we feel that this is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of research and understanding the issues around greening construction, because it is the sector that is most often thought about, because buildings are such a huge part of meeting the targets. So what I'm going to do now is, I think, hand back to Kat, who is going to introduce our respondents to the report to get their viewpoints, but then open it up to questions and really just start, you know, I mean, I know that these conversations have been happening, but really, you know, get this going so that we can not only do our bit to mitigate some of the issues, but see where we can go in terms of getting young people to really take this forward and you know, lead the way with greening construction in jobs. Over to you, Kat.
Thank you so much, Susan. Yeah, we want to keep this conversation going. I mean, it's a really important issue, obviously, as we all know. And yeah, that was really good to get those, distilling those findings into a presentation, which was, you know, we had such rich findings, especially from the workshop that we had with all the stakeholders as well. So I'm going to turn now to our respondents. We're very privileged to have 4 experts with us here today. First of all, we're going to hear from Craig Thorley, who is Head of Labour Markets and Sectors Strategy at the Department for Education. So yeah, I'll hand over to you now, and it'd be great to hear your reflections on the research and these issues.
Thanks very much, and afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the invitation to be with you today, and more importantly, for all of the energy and time that has gone into this report. It's of course impossible to overstate the importance of the net zero transition and the need to enable it through timely and effective public policy decisions. Ensuring the workforce is in place with the right skills to deliver on the ground is obviously a hugely important part of that. So the ideas and evidence in today's report is hugely welcome as we continue to try to understand and meet this challenge. I think it's fair to say that we're still at the foothills of shifting the skills system and indeed the broader economy towards green jobs and skills. Something which I thought came through really strongly in the report, and which has also been emphasised by the Green Jobs Task Force and others, is the need to give business and individuals confidence in the direction of travel so that they can take decisions on adapting their working practices and their skills mix without fearing that they're being led down a dead end. I I think that across government, particularly in BEIS, which is in the lead on much of this agenda, recognition of that fact has been behind the growing number of publications and announcements in this space over the past couple of years, from the Prime Minister's 10-point plan to the net zero strategy, which was published in October of last year, to a number of sector specific strategies in areas like heat and buildings and hydrogen. I completely agree that a particular focus on construction as part of this work is really important. This is due to the overall number and proportion of jobs in the sector which have the potential to be green, the immediacy of the need to train people to fill many of those jobs, and the impact that filling those jobs will have on moving us towards the net zero target. It's been quite a big day today for green skills research, as well as the report that we're discussing this afternoon. I noticed that LinkedIn had published some research today on green skills, which points to construction as having double the level of green skills intensity compared to the average across all sectors. So I think there's this kind of growing consensus that construction has a really important role to play in this agenda. It's also important because relative to some other sectors, green jobs in construction will likely be spread across the whole of the UK, at least for specific occupations related to things like retrofit. And then there are, of course, the particular challenges the construction sector faces in boosting green skills, such as due to the high number of SMEs, which is absolutely something that the department is conscious of. And so again, it was really good to see that problem considered in today's reports. So what are we doing about it? Well, first, we in government are trying to continue to improve our understanding of the demand for green jobs and the extent to which a lack of skills is a barrier preventing people from taking them on. Part of that involves trying to home in on particular occupations to understand where, when, and in what quantity these jobs will emerge. Industry has a really important role to play in helping us to get to a more granular understanding of that question, or that set of questions. Groups and organisations like the Infrastructure Projects Authority, the Construction Leadership Council, the Construction Skills Delivery Group, and the Construction Industry Training Board are all helping us to make progress on understanding demand for green skills in construction. The second big thing we're trying to do is to understand and improve the extent to which the skills system is geared up to help generate the supply of, the supply of skilled individuals in line with that demand. There are some areas where we're making good progress on that, but there are also areas where we could no doubt go further and faster as our granular understanding of demand improves. Just to rattle through a couple of examples of things that are going on out there in the real world, which I thought were particularly relevant to some of the areas highlighted by the report. Firstly, new local skills improvement plans will see local colleges and businesses work together to articulate unmet and future local skills needs, and then adapt the technical training offer to make it more responsive. Through the skills bill, which is working its way through Parliament at the moment, we're ensuring that there is a statutory requirement for these plans to have regards to green skills. We are also embedding a requirement to integrate sustainability into FE teaching. So I absolutely agree with the finding in the report that kind of helping to bring about a shift in mentality amongst tomorrow's generation of workers will be really crucial if we're going to encourage more people to take the plunge and retrain in line with the needs of green jobs throughout their careers. We're rolling out new green skills boot camps, which are intensive bursts of training lasting up to 16 weeks in areas like retrofit. Wave 3 of this provision will go live later this year and will help thousands more people get the green skills they need to put them on a path to a future green career. The Green Apprenticeships Advisory panel is mapping existing apprenticeship standards against green occupations and identifying opportunities to create new standards. And we are taking some steps to try to help SMEs in particular to have greater access to apprenticeships. So employers in the construction sector can now front load their training as part of apprenticeships, so that apprentices take the kind of classroom based part of their apprenticeship training at the beginning. So there's less kind of dipping in and out of the workplace to return to the classroom as their apprenticeship continues. And through a new levy transfer system, we're helping more larger businesses to transfer part of their unspent levy to SMEs. And just to wrap up, I think it's worth saying that we can only make progress on all of this by working together. So this absolutely isn't a challenge that government can meet on its own. It will require industry, the skills sector, local government all working together, and then using the insights generated by academia and the wider public policy ecosystem. And through things like the Green Jobs Task Force, you know, there are some really good examples of that kind of collaboration happening. Conscious I haven't touched on all of the, or even a sizable chunk of the points from the report, but hopefully that's a kind of useful overview of some of the things that the department is doing to address this challenge. And as was said earlier, hopefully the beginning of a conversation that we can continue after today.
Great, thank you so much, Craig. And yeah, really good to hear some of the initiatives going on from the government side. And yeah, really important point about working together. It's not just government or industry, it's collective effort that needs to happen to support this. So thank you. We're going to move on now to Professor Chris Winch, who is Professor of Educational Philosophy and Policy in the Department of Educational Studies at King's College London. Welcome, Chris, and it'd be good to hear your reflections for a few minutes.
Thank you very much, Kat. I'll just share my screen with you, and I'll cover what I think are the main points in the report, and also add some observations of my own, which really carry on from that. Okay, can you see the screen now, Kat?
Yes, we can, yeah.
Okay, so first of all, these are the points that I thought were of particular importance. Obviously, it's not exhaustive, but I'm just trying to pick out some key themes. The first one being the acknowledged patchy progress in low carbon construction. There is progress being made, but it's very variable, as the report suggests, and perhaps not in the report, but we have some evidence of, is that there are national variations, for example, in Wales and Scotland, which might be worth looking at further. The report drew attention, second, to structural features of the sector, and Craig has mentioned this as well, limited capacity, either for initial or continuing vocational education and training. And as Craig suggested, apprenticeship provision is a particular problem for small and micro businesses. I just add something to that, in addition to the points about levy transfer and so on, that when you have apprentices, this is a learning as well as a work environment. And I think there's a real need to support these smaller businesses in terms of both their pedagogic and their pastoral function. I don't think that's been given enough thought, really, particularly as the construction environment can be quite a demanding one. My third point is something which I think is really important, relating to the interdependence of initial and continuing vocational education. If workplace practice is not up to date, then apprenticeship and internship learning experiences are compromised. So really, the improvements in IVET and CVET need to go hand in hand if the apprenticeship route in particular is to be properly supported. Point number 4, I fully endorse the need for workforce abilities relating to collaboration and overall project awareness. This seems to be really important, and collaboration in particular between occupations is an area which needs attention, for example, in insulation. And I think we've got something to learn from other European countries in this respect, perhaps Belgium being a good example. The report also mentions the need for a better regulatory environment, and stick-shaped carrots, and even the license to build is mentioned. And I would endorse that. I'd only add that I think in the current political climate in England, increasing regulation is probably a tough call. And I'll come back to that in a moment. So moving on from there, what points do I think need some development? And I've got 5 here, which I think do need mentioning. As well as regulation, I think first we need to think in terms of procurement practices, and not just specifying green elements in contracts, but closely monitoring the performance of contractors with a view to future contracts. Point number 2, I'm not entirely happy with the tripartite knowledge, skills, and behaviors, because I think in terms of green construction, behaviors are not enough. You can behave in certain ways and not have the right attitudes. Far more important, I think, is having the attitude of collaboration and getting it right. And in terms of green construction, this is particularly important. So I'd suggest revisiting the apprenticeship standards and thinking in terms of attitudes rather than behaviors. And again, we've got something to learn from Belgium in this respect. Point number 3, building according to the design specification requires attention to detail, but also inter-occupational collaboration. And this can be achieved with improved training and improved on-site practices, going back to that interdependence point that I made earlier on. Building according to specification should be standard contractual practice and properly monitored. In fact, even if you don't consider technological innovation and just consider building according to specification, you will probably achieve quite a bit, quite irrespective of technological innovation. And my final point relating to these, I think, is all of this is not just about skills. It's also focus on the project whole. So it's awareness of project management and one's place in the project. And I think that the term skills isn't really helpful if it's used as a kind of global concept for all the abilities and attitudes that are required to make this work. And again, I suggest a conceptual shift to thinking not just in terms of skills, although these are clearly important, but also to thinking in terms of transversal abilities and attitudes as well. And I think I've covered what I wanted to cover, so I'll stop at that point.
Great, thank you so much, Chris. Some really important points there, and great to have a few challenges as well for us to discuss and revisit as well later on. I'm going to hand over now to Brian Berry, who is the Chief Executive of Federation of Master Builders. So over to you, Brian.
Thanks so much, Kat, and thank you for the opportunity to be here to discuss this report, which I think is really important and very timely, because as has been mentioned, the number one issue really is about climate change and how do we deliver zero carbon by 2050, which is the government's stated and legal obligation. And we won't ever achieve that, of course, unless actually the construction industry becomes greener in its approach. And I think that's where my members have a key role to play. The Federation of Master Builders is a trade body for small and micro building companies all across the UK. Most of my members are involved in repair, maintenance and improvement work. So they've got a key role to play in actually reducing carbon emissions. And we know that's important because of the 28 million homes in this country, that the housing stock contributes 20% of the UK's carbon emissions. So there's a huge challenge there and a market opportunity that we know is worth £3.5 billion a year plus, if only we could find the right levers to tap into that. And the government's approach to incentivizing small builders has been, to say, somewhat patchy. Many of you will be familiar with the Green Deal under the coalition government, which with an interest rate that was more expensive than if you went to the bank. Then during the pandemic, we had the Green Homes Grant Scheme. Now, these are all very laudable, but the trouble is when government introduces a policy and then takes it away, small builders in particular lose confidence in investing. And there is an absence of a long-term plan which to work with the building industry to actually upskill and green and deliver a zero carbon built environment. And the impact of this, of course, is that for many construction companies, there's very little incentive to invest. And we've seen over the last couple of decades a fall in the quality of apprenticeships in this country, and the reliance until recently of cheap EU labour has exacerbated that problem. 9% of the construction workforce up until the time of the pandemic came from the EU. And then you add to this problem the landscape for training, and it's a very patchy, confusing landscape, and which makes it very difficult for small employers to navigate. And so what happens is, of course, in small building companies, they tend to recruit from people that they know. And the impact of this is we're missing out on huge parts of society that are not attracted to the building industry, with the result that in the construction sector, only 10% are women. And actually, if you look at the on the tools, it's less than 3% are women on working on the tools. So given that we have a growing skills problem in the building industry, and given that actually we are facing the fallout from the Brexit, we've obviously still recovering from the COVID-19 pandemic. And of course, now we're facing another crisis with the Russian invasion of Ukraine. All these factors have resulted in material shortages, price inflation, and now energy prices are shooting up. And until very recently, the repair, maintenance, improvement sector has really been accelerating. People during the pandemic had extra money as a result of not being able to travel or go away. And that money was spent on their homes. And so small builders had very little incentive actually to upskill or think about green skills because the RMI market was so buoyant. And that still remains the case largely. It will be interesting to see the impact of government policies from April onwards and the rise and the impact of energy prices on household expenditure. I mentioned the skills challenge because even before the start of the pandemic, there was a shortage of people in our industry. We carry out a quarterly survey of our members, and we know that bricklayers and carpenters and all the trades are in short supply. At the moment, there are an estimated 42,000 vacancies in the building industry. And the government's response, as Craig was mentioning, has been a series of initiatives, flexible apprenticeships, boot camps, the rollout of the T levels, which are all very commendable. But I think for many small companies, they don't know how to access these options. And it would be better if we could actually pull this into a long-term strategy for skills if we're going to tackle the solution in delivering a zero carbon built environment. So in terms of solutions, I just want to pick up that we need to make it easier and more attractive for people to join our industry. And that requires industry working in a collaborative way with government and the education sector. And there is some movement on that through the Construction Skills Delivery Group, which has, I think, been a very important delivery group over the last 2 years. We do need a long-term skills strategy so that we all know and understand actually what is happening. Within the trades, we need to remove the silos that operate because at the moment, the trades are doing what they've always done because there's sufficient work for them to do so. And we need a refocus on vocational training, which your report highlights. And my last bit that I want to mention is the issue about regulation. I think one of the key problems for our industry has been the fact that anyone can call themselves a builder. It is the last bit that is totally unregulated. If you're a general builder, there's no competent person scheme, there's no need to be licensed, there's no formal qualification that is needed. Surely, if we are going to upskill our workforce, there should be licensing of building companies. Householders spend tens of thousands of pounds upgrading their homes with little confidence that actually the company that they're using is fully competent to do the work. And we've got a model in place. We've got the Trustmark model, which could be adapted and changed to become a licensing authority for building companies. And we have seen some progress. In November last year, there was a private members bill in Parliament calling for the licensing of domestic building companies. That was withdrawn, and the government is looking at the issue at the moment. I'm not hopeful at the moment that this government will want to introduce more regulation, but I think it is just a matter of time until we have that if we're going to deliver a green Britain. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Brian. It's really excellent to have your insights from the industry and really, like you say, thinking about kind of the wider cultural issues within the industry and kind of the global issues that obviously are affecting the sector as well. Thank you. So I'm just going to finally move over to our final respondents before we go to Q&A. Please keep posting questions in the Q&A function. But I'd just like to introduce Teresa Frith, who is a Senior Skills Policy Manager at the Association of Colleges. So over to you, Teresa. Thank you.
Thanks, Kat. Thanks. Well, I'm going to repeat some of the things that other people have said and hopefully say some new stuff too. But I feel this report really gives us a pretty fair reflection of the construction sector, and it moves our thinking on in our understanding of some of the issues that are sitting within that sector, which can make creating workable solutions to the problems pretty hard to find. And I'm currently sitting, I work with the Construction Leadership Council and CITB and others, and BAYES, in trying to look at how we bring education and the sector closer together to talk about and resolve some of those issues. I think the report highlights that lack of recognisable agreement about what it is we're actually talking about when we say green skills. I think we all probably have a different thing in our heads when we say those words. So getting closer to some sort of agreement is great. And I think possibly we're not looking at flicking a switch in terms of changing what we're currently doing to change it over to green. I think we're looking at a morph from where we are to taking ourselves on that journey. I think it's critical that we recognise that vocational skills gained are utilised within a culture and a context. And I think that report brings us out very neatly. And that if you ignore that, you can seriously undermine the effectiveness of the training that is provided. And this is a key part of the thinking behind the development of occupational traineeships, for an example. Just having the skill is insufficient to make a successful and smooth transition from education into employment. Young people need an understanding of the culture and the environment within which they will use their skills. And the occupational traineeship is designed to help make that shift, that transition, more effective. But the report also suggests, and I think it's right, that there's a need for a bit of a cultural shift, which I think the industry itself recognises in construction, and that young people, and I would say possibly older people too, can be the agents of change to shift that culture. So that leaves the education sector a bit of a dilemma. Do we prepare college students and others for the existing reality or for the new reality? Maybe it's a bit of both. Maybe the solution sits somewhere in between. What is clear, I think, is the need for new thinking and stronger direct partnerships between industry and education at all levels, at national, local, and at strategic and operational levels, especially if we are to get to grips with HCQs that are going to support construction in the future, and other developments which will no doubt be thrown at us along the way. We need new solutions to old problems, like ensuring that the college workforce can deliver for the construction sector. Fortunately, this is a point that Construction Leadership Council have taken very seriously and recognised as being the construction sector's problem just as much as it is the further education sector's problem. We know that colleges can't compete on wages to attract the high quality training staff we need. So how do we engage and ensure that colleges do have the capacity to support the sector through a period of what is likely to be unprecedented change? The only way I can see success is through new partnership with industry and new ways of working and new ways of thinking. Not only do we need the training of the construction workforce to be flexible, adaptable and resilient, But we also need to see these shifts in further and higher education's approach to the training and education workforce that supports that sector. We have an existing construction workforce supporting gaining new skills and attitudes as well as supporting the new workforce that we will hope will be joining them. The challenge is large, the challenge is complex, and in a world where the only constant is change, and solutions to large, complex challenges will need strong, effective, well-managed, well-resourced partnerships to solve them. And those partnerships need to include government departments, not just DFE, but BAYS, DWP, Levelling Up, etc. All levels of education and training, and the comprehensive voice of employers of all sizes. And that is no mean feat to bring those people together. But if you want to see what bringing committed people together can achieve, you only have to look in the chat of this particular session, I think. I welcome this report and the honest contribution that it provides to this debate. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Teresa, and to all our respondents. I think it's really kind of highlighted that we really need to bring together all education and training industry, sector, the industry, policymakers and the researchers. Really, it's about collaboration and working together to try and solve some of these issues. So I want to leave as much time as possible for Q&A. We've got about 10 minutes, so I'm going to hand over to Susan and invite everyone to turn their cameras on, and we'll have a short Q&A session.
Thanks, Kat. Lots of really interesting points being made in the chat. Chris has rightly pointed out that Linda Clark, who's here, and her colleague have been doing some work, particularly on his 5 points that we all should be familiar with. It just feels like we're at a turning point where if we don't do something now, we're going to be still having these conversations in 10 years' time. So really just open it up to questions now.
I think we've had one in the chat. What level of confidence do businesses and HE and FE have to fully commit to the training on technologies and retrofit, etc.? This one is from Nigel Jenkins. So particularly as training is an advanced enabler to making this happen at pace and scale, yet the policy direction may be muddled at best.
Yeah,
Evan, you've talked about this in the past of you know, when we've been having our team meetings about the pace and the scale. Would you like to comment?
Thanks, Susan. I think the answer is not much confidence, actually. I'm sorry to say this, but picking up on what Brian was saying about the industry experience over at least a decade has been a stop-start government policy that doesn't just do nothing, it actually undermines confidence. I know that's not an easy message to convey, but there's plenty of evidence that that's what's happening.
Good.
So, sorry.
Yeah, I would just echo what Gavin has just said. And of course, I did mention this. I know some of my members who actually lost money because of the introduction of the Green Homes Grant Scheme. So all this is very undermining. And we've still yet to see a really joined up approach to retrofitting. We've had the heat and building strategy, which is focused on social housing. But if you're an owner occupier, which is what about nearly 70% of the housing stock, there is very, very limited help that we're being told about a small number of vouchers to remove your gas boiler. But what about insulating your home, which is what is the real challenge? And these big gaps, because the government, I think, is not been fully understanding the requirements of retrofit, which is why the Construction Leadership Council has been arguing the case for a national retrofit strategy. You need to look at all the components. We've identified 8. So you need the leadership, you need consumer awareness, you need standards of competence. You can't just pick one out and say we're going to hand out a few vouchers if there isn't a skilled workforce to do the work. And you can't just introduce heating systems if you don't insulate the home. So very muddled thinking, I would suggest.
Yeah, I mean, I'd go with what Brian's saying there. Certainly, these conversations do come up at Construction Leadership Council and other areas, and they are the precise nature of the conversations I'm having with BAYS at the moment, and looking at how we bring the retrofit 8 areas together and then look at what the solution is, talking to both industry and training providers across the range of types, to how do we solve this, and at what point do we move? Because the other problem we have is this lag between when there's local demand for things and when a training provider is in a position to respond to them, particularly when they are heavy capital investments and staffing investments, and especially when the industry is going to be paying a premium rate for a level 4 heat pump technician that a college can't possibly hope to match with the amount of money that it can pay a heat pump specialist to come train those very people. And we need the best people to be training in order that the people who churf out the other end of the colleges are at the right level and can be, you know, relied upon by staff. But we don't know when that point's going to be, because Brian's point is well made. When will most of the fossil fuel employers in local areas actually make the shift and start ringing up the college and say, hi, can you train my staff in heat pump technology, please? Rather than let's just continue with gas boiler maintenance until I retire. So yeah, it's a very difficult one. I think that those carrot-shaped sticks that were talked about earlier in the report, I think it's a really good point to make, because somebody at some point can't just leave it all to the market, because the market will decide to sit on its heels, I think. And all our thinking will keep going until such time as the first people start ringing up and saying, hi, I'd like a heat pump, please, who aren't, you know, in the small minority who have already done it.
Thanks, Teresa. Yeah, really good points made. And the point was also made in the chat of consumer demand helping to drive this also. Linda Clark has raised an interesting point. Surely unions also have a role to play. I don't know for sure, but having read some of Linda and Chris's work, I wouldn't mind betting that the findings that we found in the food processing sector apply here, in that there is a lot of low wage work and workers then also paying union fees. It was the first thing that they stopped doing, you know, with their low salaries. So I wouldn't mind betting that union membership is actually quite low in this sector. But perhaps, Brian, you might like to come in on the union point.
Yes, I think you're right. Probably union representation is much less than it was 20, 30, 40 years ago. We have an arrangement with Unite, but it's a sort of voluntary arrangement. The influence and power of the unions has been a lot less than it has been in previous years.
Chris, would you like to come in at all from your research? Oh, we can't hear you.
Picking up the point that Linda made, I think the unions do have an important role to play, particularly in this area of interoccupational collaboration and making sure that the different trades work together productively, and indeed in supporting CVET on site and making sure that the proper standards are adhered to. And I guess in the smaller businesses where there is a union presence, helping to make sure of the pedagogical and pastoral quality of the experience that apprentices get.
I think that's a really important point. Scott has asked in the chat, you know, in the report, we've made the distinction between new and emerging jobs, skills development for existing trades, and increased demand for existing skills. And if the panel, if we had to focus on one of these, which should it be? Oof, that's a tough one. I'm personally, I don't think you could choose just one. This problem is so complex and interrelated along the whole spectrum. Someone made the comment in the chat around, you know, a lot of the new builds that we're building now are going to have to be retrofitted in 10 years' time. So, you know, the process, it's at all different points of the process, but I will draw on the panel to come forward, and they might choose one as opposed to my hit as many on the head as possible approach.
I think what I'd say in FE is we'll serve first come, first served is a little bit of a thing. So young people are already demanding and wanting information about climate change, about what they can do, what they can bring, not necessarily within their courses, but within their enrichment and their general lives. within the college culture. So I think that certainly is an area we would expect to address. But as local employers that colleges work with come to them with these requests, it's incumbent upon the college to make sure it can respond. And the only way it's going to be able to respond in a sensible time frame is if it's anticipated that demand. And I think the point's been already very well made that how do you anticipate that demand when there isn't the supreme confidence of all parts of the world in what is actually going to happen over the next 10 to 15 years?
And I would just argue you can't prioritize those. There's been a lot of discussion about new skills in our industry and the emphasis on modern methods of construction, but I would like to see more discussion about our traditional trades and skills, because those are the ones that need to be developed and upskilled if we're going to deliver a green Britain. And we need to get all the trades to understand how they interrelate to each other if you're going to actually create a low carbon built environment. So it's easy to point the finger and say, well, the bright and shiny new ways of doing things. But actually, given that 85% of our homes will still be here in 2050, let's focus on our traditional skills and make them relevant to the needs of today.
Thanks very much, Brian. I am very conscious of time. We've got 3 minutes left. Chris, would you like to come in?
Yeah, just to follow up very quickly on the point that Brian made. I think that the research that I've done with Linda Clark and Melahat Saindikmen suggests that most players in the industry would prefer, on the whole, a metamorphosis of existing occupations to take account of new developments rather than the wholesale creation of new occupations. I'd just like to add as well that the level 2 consultation document is now out, and I think one may draw some encouragement from the emphasis in that of increased periods of vocational education, and also a recommendation on greater breadth in the occupational configuration, more than currently exists. And in particular, I think there are hints that for example, there should be interoccupational awareness in sectors like the construction industry. So if that's thought can be pushed along with some encouragements, I think that would be very useful.
Thanks very much, Chris. I think that's exactly right about interoccupational issues. Kat, we've got 1 minute left.
Yeah, I think we'll have to draw it to a close now. I just wanted to say a huge thank you to all our panelists today. It's been great to hear your reflections on the piece, as well as to Susan and the rest of the research team who were involved in this piece of research. We'd really like to continue the conversation in this. Please do share and read the report. I'll put the link again in the chat. You can also contact us. We'd love to hear your thoughts and reflections on this too, and do continue to tweet about it using the hashtag greening construction. So that's just leaves me to say thank you everyone for joining today, and again thank you for all our panelists as well. Have a good day everybody. Thank you.